Hello and welcome to Haven Humane Society's Dog and Cat Body Language class. Today we're going to learn about dog body language, cat body language, and how to safely work with animals in a shelter setting. Understanding animal body language is important because that's how animals communicate with us. They can't have conversations like you and I or use their voice necessarily, but they can use body language signals to let us know how they're feeling. And in order to have safe and positive interactions with the animals, it's important that we are able to read these body language signals and know how to respond to them. First, we're going to talk about dogs. When humans think of dog body language, we tend to focus on two things. Is this dog's tail wagging, which most people know generally means a dog is happy, and is this dog growling at us, which most people know means a dog is not happy. And while those behaviors are important and we will talk about them, they are only a small piece of the canine communication ballad. There is a whole list of things that are more subtle that we're going to talk about that will let you know how a dog is feeling. Body language will show you a dog's stress level as well as their intent. What is this dog going to do next? Which is important to consider when you're working with a dog that is not your own, one that you're maybe not so familiar with. Even the most subtle movements can carry great meaning. So we're going to go through a list of things that we look for when we're working with shelter animals. First, I do want to mention that context matters. The environment, the dog you're interacting with, who else is around you, all of that will play a role in whether or not this body language signal means what you think it means. And we'll have some examples as we go through this list. First, I want to talk about looking and not looking. This is something, no pun intended, that is often overlooked when people are interacting with animals, but if a dog is looking at you, that's a good sign that it may want to have an interaction. But if a dog is avoiding eye contact and trying its hardest not to look at you, that means that it needs space and it doesn't want to interact with you at that moment. Next, we want to consider the dog's posture and how they are shifting their weight. If a dog has relaxed body language and they're up center in the front of their gait, that's probably a good sign. If they're in the back of their kennel hunched over, they just look really awkward and they're trying to avoid interaction by moving their body in particular ways, that's probably a sign that they're very uncomfortable. We'll see some video examples of this later on in the slideshow, but posture is definitely something you want to consider. Next, we're going to talk about respiration rate. And this is one of those examples where context really does play a role. If you are playing with a dog and it's breathing really fast, but you're throwing a tennis ball for it and it's running back and forth, it's probably just breathing fast because it's exercising. If you walk up to a kennel and a dog is laying on its bed, but it's panting very heavily, as long as it didn't just come back from playing or doesn't have an underlying health issue, it's likely stress. Dogs will breathe really hard when they're stressed. Next, I want to talk about tenseness of the face and or body muscles. Now this can kind of apply to our posture point as well, but when a dog is tense or stiff, that's usually a sign that it's uncomfortable. It does not mean the dog is being calm. I see a lot of people confuse stiffness for calmness, and that's not the same thing. A dog that's happy will have relaxed muscles. Typically, its mouth will be open and its tongue will be hanging out. See the German Shepherd in the top picture here, the tan and black German Shepherd with the orange collar in the top picture. Its mouth is open. That dog looks more relaxed to me. As opposed to the picture below, we see that same dog, black and tan German Shepherd with the orange collar. His mouth is now closed in a firm line. This is more concerning because the dog definitely doesn't look as relaxed. So if I was approaching that dog in the first picture, I would feel a lot more confident as opposed to approaching it in the second picture because it just looks a lot more tense. Next, we want to consider the speed and direction of the dog's movement. Oftentimes, when dogs are scared in their kennel and you walk up to them, they will dart to the back of the kennel. That dog is trying to move away from you as quickly as possible, which is a sign that it doesn't want to spend time with you at that moment. If a dog runs up to you, that might be a good sign. We have to look at additional body language signals to know for sure if that dog is being friendly or not, but we do have to consider the speed and direction of a dog's movement when we want to know how comfortable they are. The last two I like to talk about together because these things are behaviors that dogs do naturally, but also are stress signals. So licking their lips and yawning. Again, dogs will do these things naturally, but they will also do them when they're stressed. And the way to know if it's a natural behavior or a stress behavior is how many times they're done in a row. If a dog licks its lips once because you're giving it a treat, probably natural. If a dog is licking its lips over and over and over again, that's probably a stress signal. The same can be said for yawning. If a dog yawns once, it's probably just tired. But if a dog is yawning over and over again, we can assume that that's a stress signal and something in the environment is making that dog uncomfortable. One thing we always want to look at when interacting with a dog is the tail. The tail will tell you a lot about how a dog is feeling. Here I have some picture examples. Picture number 1 is an example of a neutral tail. When a dog has a standard long tail, if that dog is relaxed or content, their tail will be at a neutral level, meaning it won't be tucked under their butt, but it won't be standing straight up either. And yes, it's true that when a dog is happy, generally their tails will sway back and forth or wag, so that does typically mean the dog is happy. However, we can't always assume that because a dog is wagging its tail, that it is safe to pet. Dogs will often wag their tails for other things that we like to call overstimulation. When a dog is so excited, maybe aroused by something happening in the environment, they will wag their tail, but that doesn't necessarily mean that dog wants to be touched. So you have to consider the context when it comes to a dog wagging its tail, and of course look at all parts of the dog. Picture number 2 is depicting a tuck tail, which means that this dog is scared. When dogs are fearful, they will tuck their tails under their butts so they can kind of protect them in a way. Picture number 3 and 4 are up here because these are examples of tails that maybe aren't so standard. So either nub tails or really fluffy or curly tails. These tails might not look the same if this animal is fearful, meaning it might not be able to tuck its tail under its butt and look like picture number 2. So with all dogs, we have to look at every part of the dog to know how it's feeling, but especially if they have a different or unique tail, we can't just assume that because this dog's tail isn't tucked, that it's not scared, because its tail just physically cannot do that. So, long story short, always look at the tail, but you don't want to just base how the dog is feeling just on its tail. We want to consider the whole dog. Another really important body language signal that we want to look for is eye contact, or lack thereof. So this whole slide is about dog eyes. On the left-hand side of the slide, we have in pictures 1, 2, and 3, engaging or appeasing eye contact. This means that you can just see the colored portion of the dog's eyes, and the eyes are relaxed and sometimes even squinty, like in picture number 3. On the right-hand side of the slide, pictures 4, 5, and 6, these dogs are exhibiting avoidant or challenging eye contact, or lack thereof. This can look like whale eye that we see in picture number 4. For dogs, it's not natural to see the whites of their eyes. Unless the dog has super bulgy eyes and you can see the whites of its eyes already, this is not natural. So this dog in picture number 4 is doing what we call whale eye, or side eye is another way you could describe it. This dog is essentially trying to keep track of someone or something's movements without actually interacting with them. That's how you get the side eye. The dog's face is not turned towards whatever it wants to keep an eye on, but its eye is. You can see a similar interaction here in picture number 5. This little tan chihuahua has its head turned, but it's actually staring down the dog that's interacting with it. So this is a little different, but again, that dog isn't really willing to interact directly with this dog. Its head is slightly turned away, and it's kind of still watching what that chihuahua's movements are. And in picture number 6, this is an example of a hard-eyed stare or hard eye contact. I will say this is something that's easier to gauge in person, but this is the best picture we could find. Now, while it is good for dogs to make eye contact with you, it's also concerning when it's extended eye contact for long periods of time. A lot of people feel the same way about eye contact. You know, if someone's just holding eye contact for a really long time, it makes them uncomfortable. The same can be said for dogs. We do have to consider the rest of the dog's body language. So if a dog is looking at you for a long period of time, but let's say their butt's really wiggly, they're wagging their tail, their mouth is relaxed and open, maybe they are just looking at you for a long time. But generally what you'll see for a hard-eyed stare is the dog will hold eye contact, it will stand really still, be super stiff, and that will sometimes be accompanied by no noise, but oftentimes it will be accompanied by growling, snarling, or other concerning body language. So that is definitely something that we want to keep an eye out for. This whole slide is about conflict resolution. The dog in picture number 1 is depicting a stress yawn. We can tell by the intensity of his eyes and the fact that he didn't close them when he yawned that this is most likely a stressful scenario. Again, in person, we would be able to tell if this dog was yawning multiple times in a row, if it was a stress signal, or just a natural yawn, but the picture definitely indicates that this dog is uncomfortable. The dog in picture number 2 is indicating a paw lift. See the way his right paw is lifted off the ground? Dogs will do this when they beg or when they're meeting other animals or people to indicate that they're not a threat and try to diffuse tension in tense situations. The dog in picture number 3 is indicating a weight shift. So you can see he's standing on his front 2 legs, but all of his weight is on his back legs. He kind of goes out of frame, but you can tell just by the way that his body is positioned that his weight is on his back legs. Dogs will oftentimes do this to create more space where there isn't any. It is possible in this picture that this dog is doing what we call a play bow, but dogs will also do this in stressful situations, and this is where context is really important. The dog in picture number 4, specifically the brown dog, is indicating a stress lick. He's meeting this husky, and you can tell by the way his head is turned away from the husky and he's licking its lips that this is probably a stress signal. You can also tell by the way his front legs are positioned that he is planning on getting up quickly if necessary. So in conclusion, all of the dogs in these pictures are trying to slow down the interactions that they're having. When we see body language signals like this, it's important for us to respect them and give the dogs the space that they need. Have you ever seen a smiling dog before? Well, if you haven't, dogs can smile. It's actually called a submissive grin, and it's where they show their front teeth, but it's in a friendly, silly way. It's not an aggressive gesture like a snarl. So on this slide, on the left, we have some dogs grinning, the little white dog and the German Shepherd right below. And on the right-hand side of the slide, we have dogs snarling, which is an aggressive gesture that comes before a snap or a bite. In both of these scenarios, the dogs are showing their teeth, but the main difference is how their muscles are in the face. So on the left-hand side for the grinning dogs, their muscles are relaxed, they have soft, squinty eye contact, whereas the dogs on the right, the snarling dogs, their faces are super wrinkled, they're making hard eye contact, and they just look a lot more intense. Now, sometimes in real life, it's not as black and white as this. Dogs might have a wrinkly face and still be doing a submissive grin. So always get a second opinion if you're unsure, but we can also look at the rest of the body language. If a dog is grinning, oftentimes they might be wagging their tail, wiggling their bodies, maybe whining. If a dog is snarling, they will often be stiff, staring something down, and growling. Always err on the side of caution and get a second opinion if you're still not sure what the difference is. Here we have a little activity for you guys to practice what you think these animals are telling you with their body language. So starting with picture number 1, I'm going to give you a few seconds to think really quick what you think this dog is feeling, based on what we've learned or just your general instinct. You got it? Okay, so the dog in picture number 1 is nervous, scared, or anything that falls along the line of uncomfortable. And we can tell based on this dog's posture. His head is lowered, he looks a little stiff, and he's also backed up against a fence. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but anytime a dog is trapped, it's going to make them feel more uncomfortable. Okay, now moving on to picture number 2. What do you think this big dog is feeling? If you can't tell, there is a puppy in the back being held by a human, and this big dog seems to be meeting it for the first time. Do you think the big dog feels comfortable or not? The big dog is definitely not comfortable with this interaction. The first thing we can see is that this dog is actually not facing the puppy. He has whale eye, which means this dog is trying to see what the puppy is doing without actually engaging with it. This dog's mouth also looks pretty tense, the way it's closed in a firm line. And we might be able to see the tip of the tongue slightly sticking out a little bit, meaning this dog might be licking his lips. Of course, it's just a picture, so we'll never know, but based on all that we can see, this dog is definitely uncomfortable. Moving on to picture number 3, here we see this kitten interacting with a dog on the couch. What do you guys think the dog is feeling about this interaction? Hopefully you said uncomfortable because that's exactly what this dog is. He's actually trying to avoid interacting with this kitten by tipping his head up and away as far as possible. We can also kind of tell that he's a little nervous by the way his legs are all tucked under his body. He probably knows this kitten is sharp. The kitten seems to be enjoying this interaction, but this dog does not. Okay, moving on to picture number 4. What do you guys think is happening in this interaction here? Do you think either dog is uncomfortable? Just one dog is uncomfortable? The brown dog is definitely not comfortable with this scenario. You can tell by the way his body and face is facing away from the white dog. His tail looks like it's slightly tucked. It's not tucked all the way under his butt, but I think he would do that if it was physically possible. And he's just trying to avoid this interaction. The white and black dog is actually trying to engage. We can see it's sniffing him there. His left paw, it's kind of hard to tell with the flooring, but his left paw is actually lifted off of the ground. So he's actually doing one of those gestures where he's trying to say, I'm not a threat, I just want to say hello. So that dog is a little bit more interested in meeting this brown dog. So what I like to do during this interaction is put myself in the position of anyone interacting with these animals. If I was approaching the dog in picture number 1, I would immediately know based on its posture that it's scared, and I might wait for him to approach me. The dog in picture number 2 definitely looks uncomfortable, so I would not want to approach this dog without giving it some time to warm up, maybe offering it treats. It's definitely avoiding that puppy and that interaction. In picture number 3, oftentimes when dogs are scared in our kennels, they will just kind of turn away from you. So what I might do in this situation, and honestly you could say this for all of them, is just kind of sit outside the kennel, in the kennel if that's safe, and just allow the dog to approach on its own time. And for picture number 4, again, I would let the dog approach on its own time in this scenario. It definitely doesn't look like it doesn't want to interact, but it might need a little bit more time to warm up. Now that we've taken a look at some pictures, we have a video example here for you. This is a video of one of Haven's dogs back in 2018 named Bolt, and he does a great job at exhibiting what it can look like for dogs to show you their body language signals. In this video, we do have a behaviorist that worked for us at the time interacting with the dog. So she was aware that the dog was uncomfortable, but we did this so we could get good training footage for people to see as an example of when dogs are uncomfortable. So I'm going to play this for you. I'm going to let it play through without talking, and then I'm going to play it again and point out everything that we see in this video. Okay, so now that we've watched it once, I'm going to play it again and I'm going to point out all of the body language signals that Bolt is trying to give. So here we see the handler checks his teeth, and this is where you can kind of see that he doesn't want to spend time with this person. He tries walking away, he's licking his lips, he's backing away, weight shifting. His tail tucks here, and the handler is still able to pick him up. He doesn't look very comfortable though. His body is pretty stiff. He's kind of looking around like, who's gonna free me? And when she puts him down, you can see his tail is still tucked. He gets super hunchy. His posture is really awkward here. And then he throws out a snap. Now the snap might have shocked some people, but as someone that's worked with dogs for a long time, it's really not surprising at all. Because Bolt was trying to tell the handler again and again and again with all of the earlier body language signals that he did not appreciate the way that she was handling him, and she just wasn't paying attention. So as volunteers and staff and humans working with dogs in a shelter scenario, it's incredibly important for us to look for those earlier signals so we never put ourselves or an animal in a position where they might have to bite us. When he initially started backing away from her, that should have been her first sign that he didn't really want to spend time with her at that moment. And that's okay. You're always allowed to retreat or back off if a dog is giving you body language signals that are telling you that they don't want to spend time with you. Here we have another video example starring Bolt. In this video, we move a baby doll towards him to see how he's going to react to it. Again, I will play the video one time through without talking so you can see and decide for yourself maybe which body language signals he's showing here. And then I will play it again and I will let you know what we think he's saying. All right. So I'm sure many of you could tell that Bolt was incredibly uncomfortable with this situation. I'm going to play the video again and I'm going to point out some specific body language signals that he was trying to give the baby doll. So here he's backing away. He's actually lifting his paw there. He doesn't have much place to go, so he does a big weight shift back. And then again, when the baby doll starts approaching him, he's trying to avoid eye contact. He's lowering his head. And then he does kind of a jump back. He may have done a snap there, but it's a little hard to tell. So again, when we're working with dogs, it's really, really important that we are reading those body language signals early on before we put the dog in a position where it feels like it has no other choice to bite us. Of course, we know that we're trying to be nice in this interaction, but the dogs don't necessarily know that. So when he initially started dramatically backing away from this baby doll in the beginning, if I was that baby doll, I would say, okay, he needs some space. I'm not going to approach him right now. Maybe that would be the end of our interaction for that day, or perhaps I could try sitting outside of the kennel, giving him treats, and seeing if he could approach me. But either way, we don't want to put dogs or cats or any animals we're working with in a position where they feel threatened and that we're not listening to them and that the only thing they can do next is bite us. It's not going to be fun for you and it's not going to be fun for the animals. This slide is depicting the canine ladder of aggression. This shows the progression of dog body language. Starting at the bottom in the green, dogs will start giving you subtle signals, and those signals will escalate into a bite if everything before that is ignored. It's important to note that it's not always as obvious as this. Dogs don't give out every single signal listed here, and it can happen really quickly if a dog is super frightened. I also want to emphasize that any dog pushed too far can bite. It doesn't matter the breed, the age, or the size of the dog. If they are exhibiting concerning body language signals, those signals need to be respected so you keep yourself and the animal safe. Let's talk about road rage and barrier aggression. All animals, including us humans, have a flight, fight, or freeze response. Generally, when an animal feels threatened and it doesn't have anywhere else to go, it can't run away, then they will turn to fight to protect themselves. Road rage is a silly term we use to refer to when dogs are aggressive on leash. Believe it or not, leashes actually restrict a dog's flight response. They feel that they cannot escape if they need to. So a lot of times dogs will be aggressive on a leash when they are otherwise friendly off a leash. Sometimes this is to other animals, sometimes it's to people, but either way it can happen. Barrier aggression is referring to when a dog is aggressive behind a barrier. A good example of this is a kennel door. Again, if a dog is behind a barrier or in a kennel, they don't have anywhere to run. So if they feel threatened, the next step they're going to turn to is fight and to appear really scary and aggressive. We will see these things a lot in a shelter, so that's why we like to talk about them. One thing I will say is you don't always want to assume that if a dog is being aggressive on leash or behind a barrier, that it is road rage and barrier aggression. It could simply be that that dog is being aggressive in that moment either way. So you don't want to just go into a kennel when a dog is growling at you and say, oh, it's just barrier aggression. But we just want you to know that these things can happen. When dogs are meeting other dogs, the most respectful introductions are typically side by side, not straight on. The reason we talk about this is because it'll help us understand how we should best introduce ourselves to dogs. When there are head-on interactions, like in this picture on the top left, it can create a lot of tension, and the dogs may not get along. Approaching head-on can be threatening for some dogs. So it's best to kind of approach slightly from the side to give the dog space and let them know that they can walk away from the interaction if they want to. When dogs like other dogs and want to play, this is what it can look like. In this top left picture with the two golden retrievers, we can see one dog is bent down on its front paws with its butt in the air. This is called a play bow, and dogs will do this before play. It's kind of their fun way of saying like, okay, we're gonna fight, but it's all pretend. It's not a real fight. Dogs will also do this to humans when they want to play with them. So if you haven't been around dogs a lot before and a dog does this to you, it is a friendly gesture. The picture right below these two Goldens is the same thing. These dogs just have like way more energy. Still play bows, they just look like they're going to play 10 times harder. The two pictures on the right-hand side of the slide are depicting that when dogs have really healthy play relationships, they'll oftentimes switch roles. So one dog will pretend to be the aggressor, and then the other dog will get a turn, and it'll kind of go back and forth in a healthy manner. When dogs need to set boundaries with other dogs, they will typically hand out warnings or corrections. Dogs can't have a conversation or an argument like us humans. So, they can't say, hey, you're stepping on my foot. Actually, can you back off a little bit? So they have to do this by using body language signals, which is typically a raised lip, a growl. A correction can look like a snap. So they're not actually biting the dog, but they are air snapping towards them. Warnings and corrections are normal and healthy behaviors. It's how dogs communicate their boundaries. As humans that are working with dogs, it's really important that we respect these warnings and corrections. Not only is that going to build a better relationship with the dog, but most importantly, it's going to keep us and the dog safe. This whole slide is about threatening gestures. On this slide, I have pictures of dogs interacting with other dogs, as well as humans interacting with dogs, to just give you a comparison. Behaviors like leaning over, hugging, or restraining dogs can make them feel threatened. And this is because in dog world, these behaviors don't often mean that a dog is trying to be friendly. In fact, it usually means the dog is trying to cause issues. So when you're working in a shelter environment, we really need to remember that these are not our personal pets. Leaning over a dog can make them feel threatened, especially if you're a taller human. Hugging a dog is especially threatening because dogs don't naturally hug like humans do, right? They might cuddle, but if you wrap your arms around a dog's neck and it doesn't know you, it's probably going to think you have bad intentions. So always remember that. Sometimes human body language does not relate to dog body language, and we always want to do our best to make the dogs feel as safe as possible. As a human, when you're greeting a dog, it's important that we avoid staring at them directly and approaching head on. Remember from one of our previous slides, it's most respectful when dogs approach each other side by side. So we want to do that as humans. You want to avoid leaning over or towards the dog, even when you change position or squat to get up. So basically, you have to be mindful of your body language at all times. Sudden movements can sometimes spook the dogs. And the third picture on this slide, avoid reaching your hand out for the dog to sniff. This is super important. Everyone was taught this growing up for some reason, myself included, but it's actually a very unnecessary behavior and oftentimes makes dogs feel more uncomfortable. Our hands aren't usually a good indicator of what we smell like because they're generally going to smell like something we ate, something we were holding before then, possibly another animal we were just petting. So letting the dog sniff your hand really isn't going to help them much. It also naturally makes people lean over dogs, and that's already kind of a scary behavior from what we've learned. So we'll talk about the best thing to do on the next slide, but if it is something that you do naturally or something you learned growing up, definitely try to unlearn this behavior moving forward. The proper way to greet dogs is to approach sideways and look using your peripheral vision. Oftentimes, I will start speaking with the handler instead of the dog, so the dog doesn't assume that all of my focus is on them. And this is especially helpful with more fearful dogs. Stay outside the dog's bubble and present your side to the dog. I would only crouch down if the dog is already giving you good body language signals, but oftentimes crouching down and getting on a lower level will make a dog feel safer. Number 3 is super important. Let the dog approach at his own rate. Oftentimes we assume that all dogs want to say hi to humans, and that's not always the case. Just like humans, there are extroverted dogs, introverted dogs, and we have to respect that. It's always going to be safer if you let the dog approach you at its own rate. If everything looks good with the dog, they look relaxed, they're exhibiting positive body language signals, and they're soliciting your attention by attempting to get you to pet them, then of course it's good to pet the dog. And it goes without saying, but always make sure the handler is aware and has given you the okay to interact with the dog. So that is it for our dog body language portion. I hope that everyone learned something or was at least reminded of something important. And of course, you will get better understanding when we do hands-on training. But now we're going to move into cats. This is an example of what our cattery looks like from behind, and here you can see one of our volunteers, Nancy, interacting with one of our cats. So when it comes to cat body language, these are some feline greeting postures. Typically, when cats are happy to see you, they'll rub against your legs. They'll rub their body against your ankles, always when you're carrying like 5 bags of groceries, of course, but this is their way of saying, I love you. Now, our cats, they're in condos that are off the ground, so typically they're not going to be able to rub against your legs. We do have one community cat room where cats can be on the ground and they may do this, but oftentimes in our condos you'll see cats rub their heads against your hand or your body, and you can see that in the bottom right picture here. The cat on the bottom left picture is rolled on its back, and this is a sign that this cat really trusts you. It's a pretty vulnerable position for cats to be in on their back with their belly exposed, so if a cat is doing this, that means that they feel safe in that environment that they're in. What this does not mean is that this cat wants you to pet their belly. All cats are different, but I would say most cats aren't going to appreciate it. Belly pets are usually preferred by dogs over cats. You can try, but be careful because a lot of cats will try to scratch you if you touch their belly. Cats purring is usually a sign of contentment or seeking companionship. If you don't know what purring is, basically it's tiny vibrations from within the cat that kind of sounds like a little car motor. It's very sweet. As sad as it is, this can also occur when in pain or just before dying as kind of a self-soothing mechanism. So while purring is almost always a positive body language signal, you still want to be careful. If the cat is purring but other things seem off, definitely get some assistance. When cats rub their heads on things, this is called bunting, and they tend to rub or mark objects, humans, and other animals. It's because they have pheromone production glands in their cheeks and just in front of their ears, and it's kind of them rubbing those pheromones on the things that they're rubbing on. When cats are not happy, this is what it can look like. So just like dogs and most animals, cats have a fight, flight, or freeze response. And when cats are in our condos, they don't have anywhere to go. So if they are scared, they'll often choose fight as their defense mechanism. The cat in the top picture here, he was actually in our photo room when this was being taken, and you could tell that he wasn't a huge fan. So typically when a cat is scared and they don't have anywhere to run, they'll kind of get in this crouch position. They'll crouch down. They'll often pull their ears back. Here you can see his ears are actually forward, which is rare, but most of the time you'll see their ears go back. They might hiss or growl. They growl just like dogs. And then if those body language signals are not listened to, then they might lunge or swat at you and then bite if necessary. The cat below, this orange kitty, has somewhere to run. So he's outside, he's standing on a car. And a threatened cat that has a flight option is typically going to appear a little bit more confident. So this is where we get that like classic Halloween cat pose. So he's super puffy. This is called piloerection, and it's where their hair stands up. It's similar to us getting goosebumps. They're going to unsheathe their nails. They still might hiss, growl, or yowl, but essentially this cat knows that it has flight as an option. It's probably going to run away when it comes down to it. So you might see both of these, but it's more common that you will see the defensive position on the top picture because our cats don't have anywhere to run. And either way, we want to respect these signals and back off and give the cat space. And here I have a video example of a not so happy cat, so you can see what it might look like if you're approaching a condo and a cat is not as friendly. So you can definitely see that she was not happy with this interaction. Now this cat actually had kittens, and that's what you can see in the cuddle box behind her. A cuddle box is a smaller box that we put in a cat condo so that they can feel safer, and she took all of her little kittens in there to keep them safe. So she was actually just being a protective mom. But either way, this is a really good example of what it might look like if a cat is more defensive in their condo. So when a cat is doing this behavior, it's definitely safest for us to back off. We don't want to open the condo and tell them it's okay and keep trying to approach them because she's already told us she doesn't want to interact with us. If you really wanted to, you might be able to toss a treat in there to see if that helps her warm up, but in this case, she was just being really defensive of her babies, so we should have left her alone in this moment. That would be the appropriate response. And I'm going to play it one more time. You can see that she's eating here, and then when she notices the camera, she hisses. And the cameraman doesn't back off, so she hisses again. And here it's a little bit more intense. You can see she actually kind of jumps out. So she lunges forward saying, "This is your last warning," and that's when the cameraman decides to listen. So obviously we would probably want to back off at that first hiss, but it also just kind of goes to show that cats can kind of escalate in their body language just like dogs can. So this is an older picture, but I love it because it depicts one stressed cat in a happy group. Can you guys tell which cat is not so happy? Yeah, it's this guy here. So all of the other cats are relaxed, their ears are up and forward, but this orange cat is kind of hunchy, his tail is even wrapped around his body, he's mean mugging that bat cat for whatever reason, and his ears are back into the side. So you can just tell that he's slightly more unhappy than the other cats in this environment. That is going to conclude the cat portion of our body language slides. And now some key points to remember when you're moving forward with working with shelter animals. 1. When it comes to body language, context matters. We have to consider the environment and how we're working with the animal to get a real picture. 2. The shelter is a stressful environment. As much as we have good intentions and we are there to help the animals, they don't always know that we're there with good intentions, and it can be really scary, so we want to let our animals have space when they need it. 3. A fearful animal is the most likely to bite you. Most of the time, animals don't want to bite people simply for the fun of biting them. It's usually in self-defense. So if an animal is scared and showing you body language signals to back off, we want to respect those. 4. Shelter animals are not our personal pets. We might form relationships and bonds with some of the animals that we meet at the shelter, but we have to remember that we don't know their entire background. We want to treat every animal the same and not assume that animals are going to let us do certain behaviors like hugging, kissing, or restraining them in any way without a reaction. And five, safety should always be our number one priority. We are here to make the animals' lives better, and if safety is not at the top of our list, then we are not going to have positive or good interactions with the animals here. So no matter what, always prioritize your safety, and that will also help keep the animals safe as well. All right, folks, we have made it to the end of our dog and cat body language class. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you can take what you learn so you can have fun and safe interactions with all of the shelter animals during your time with us.